Welcome back to Essential Dialogues. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into something pretty crucial for the future of the Ethiopian economy, the Ethiopian Investment Holdings.
Or as most people call it, EIH.
Right, EIH, exactly.
And yeah, you're spot on. This is a big deal. We're not just talking about some, run-of-the-mill financial institution. This thing could seriously reshape entire industries, and we're going to break it all down, by looking at the official documents and regulations, all that good stuff surrounding EIH.
Sounds good. I mean, we're talking about billions and billions of birr in assets that the government owns everything from land to infrastructure. It's all under EIH's management. It's a lot.
Oh, it definitely is. And that's what makes this so interesting. They've got to make these assets profitable, but also keep in mind sustainable development. So, it's not just about squeezing every last burr out of these assets. It's about strategic investments for the long haul.
Okay, so I think for some of our listeners who, maybe they're not finance experts or they haven't been following every twist and turn of the Ethiopian economy, can you just take a step back and explain what exactly is EIH and what is it supposed to do?
Sure. So in the simplest terms, EIH is like this giant investment arm of the Ethiopian government. It was officially established back in 2021, and its main mission, you can find it spelled out in Proclamation No. 1263/2021, is to boost sustainable economic development. But here's the thing that makes it really interesting. Even though the government owns it, EIH is actually set up to operate like a private company.
Oh, that's really interesting. So they're trying to bring in like the efficiency of the private sector, but with the resources and backing of the government. What's the thinking behind that?
That's a great question, and it kind of gets at the core of what makes EIH so fascinating, I think. By adopting this private sector model, they're signaling a potential shift away from those traditional state-owned enterprises, the
Oh,
SOEs.
right. SOEs.
Yeah, exactly. And those haven't always had the best track record.
Yeah. They have a mixed track record, let's just say.
That's a good way to put it. Often they're burdened by debt or, just tons of bureaucratic hurdles. The hope is that this new structure, this private company structure, will attract foreign investment and let EIH, move quickly when they see opportunities.
So with the SOEs, I mean, they've had their struggles in Ethiopia. A lot of them are carrying a lot of debt. There's a lot of bureaucracy. How does EIH plan to handle the SOEs that they're now in charge of?
It's a really important point. Now, the documents we've seen, they don't lay out specific plans for every single SOE, but what's clear is that they're putting a lot of emphasis on consolidation and strategic partnerships. So it seems like EIH is going to try to restructure these SOEs, you know, make them more attractive to investors, or maybe even in some cases pursue privatization.
So they're not just holding on to these assets, they're actually trying to transform them.
Exactly.
So what kind of assets are we talking about here? I mean, paint us a picture. What does EIH's portfolio actually look like?
Oh, it's incredibly diverse. We're talking about a ton of real estate land holdings, massive infrastructure projects, and then, of course, you have all those SOEs across, pretty much every sector you can think of: telecommunications, transportation, energy, you name it. It's a huge undertaking, and the potential impact is really significant.
With so much going on, it must be a really complex operation to manage. How is EIH structured to handle all of this? Who's making the big decisions?
It's a multi-tiered governance structure, and it looks like they tried to design it for oversight and to keep things efficient. At the top, you have the board of directors, and the prime minister is actually the chair.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that really shows you how important the government thinks this is.
Definitely.
But what about the day-to-day management? Who's handling that?
Well, below the board, you have a CEO who's responsible for the day-to-day operations, and then they have an executive management team to carry out those decisions. Now, the documents also mention something interesting: the possibility of an independent international advisory board, but it's not totally clear how that's going to work just yet.
It sounds like they're trying to get expertise from both inside and outside of Ethiopia to help guide their strategy. But the board, with the prime minister as chair, that's where the real power lies.
Yeah.
What are their main responsibilities?
They have a really broad mandate. They set the strategic vision. They approve all the investment plans. They're in charge of asset management. And maybe most importantly, they decide on the dividend policy. So basically, they decide how much profit goes back to the government versus how much gets reinvested back into EIH.
Right, because they need to make sure they're generating returns for the government, but also that EIH has the money it needs to keep growing and, achieve these long-term goals. Anything else that's important to understand about how EIH operates?
Yeah, actually, there are a few more things that I thought were pretty interesting. One is the sheer size of their authorized capital. It's a mind-boggling burr, 100 billion.
Wow, that's a lot of burr.
It's a lot of anything. And
Wow.
out of that, they've already paid up burr 25 billion, both in cash and in kind. The documents also say that the board has the flexibility to change this authorized capital whenever they need to.
So if they see a really good opportunity, they can raise more funds without having to go through, a ton of red tape.
Exactly. That's the idea.
That makes sense. Anything else that stands out to you?
Oh, yeah. Here's a big one. The dividends that EIH pays out to the government are exempt from any taxes or duties.
Wow. That's a huge advantage. I mean, that means they could put more of those profits back into development projects without being taxed.
It's a big incentive, but it's important to remember that this exemption doesn't apply to EIH's subsidiaries. They still have to pay the regular taxes. One last thing. EIH's financial year is the same as the Ethiopian government's fiscal year, so all their reporting and budgeting is in sync.
Okay, so we've covered how EIH is structured, what they're trying to do, and even some of the unique financial aspects. But I think the question that a lot of our listeners probably have is, what does all this mean for me? Like, how does EIH's existence actually impact the lives of everyday Ethiopians and the businesses that operate there?
That's the key question, right? And that's what we're going to dig into in the next part of our deep dive.
That's good.
I think the thing to remember is that EIH's activities could really have a ripple effect across the entire Ethiopian economy. It's not just about managing what they already have. It's about finding ways to stimulate growth and unlock potential that's been kind of, just sitting there.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's say there's this really valuable piece of land, but it's not being used effectively. EIH could come and partner with some private investors maybe and turn it into like a bustling commercial center. You'd have jobs, new businesses popping up. It would really boost the economy.
Exactly. Or imagine an SOE, one of those state-owned enterprises that's not doing so well, but it's in an industry that has a lot of potential. EIH could come in, restructure it, bring in foreign investment and expertise, and turn it into a major player. And that would mean more exports, more tax revenue for the government.
So they're trying to tackle some of those like underlying challenges that have kind of held back Ethiopia's economy in the past. But we know that international investors can be a little bit hesitant, when they see a lot of government involvement. How can EIH convince them that this is a different model, something worth investing in?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. I think EIH's success is really going to depend on proving that they're committed to transparency, efficiency, and those international best practices. The structure itself being set up like a private company, that's a good start. But they need to back that up with real actions.
So basically, they need to show a track record of making good decisions, maybe even outperforming those traditional SOEs. That's going to be key to building trust with those foreign investors.
It's absolutely essential. If they can showcase successful partnerships, streamline processes, a real commitment to good governance, that's going to send a powerful message to the world that Ethiopia is open for business and ready to compete on a global level.
It sounds like EIH could become kind of a central point of contact for investors who are interested in Ethiopia. Like a one-stop shop where they can figure out the regulations, find opportunities, even connect with local businesses.
That's the idea. And it's a pretty attractive one, especially considering Ethiopia's potential. I mean, you've got a fast-growing economy, a young and increasingly skilled workforce, and a strategically important location in East Africa. There's a lot to be excited about.
But of course, any project this big is going to face challenges. What are some of the hurdles that EIH might have to overcome to achieve these ambitious goals?
I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be changing the perception that state-owned entities are always slow and bureaucratic. They've got to prove that they can operate with the agility and responsiveness of a private company.
So changing the narrative is important. They need to show that this isn't just another SOE. It's something new, something that combines the best of the public and private sectors.
Exactly. And they also have to be very careful navigating the political landscape in Ethiopia, balancing the interests of the government, private investors, and the needs of the Ethiopian people. That's going to require careful thought and a commitment to inclusive growth.
So making sure that the benefits of economic development are shared widely and that EIH's actions don't end up making existing inequalities even worse.
That's a critical point. And of course, they're also going to face those everyday challenges of doing business in a developing economy. Things like infrastructure gaps, regulations that slow things down, capacity constraints. These are all factors that can really get in the way.
So it sounds like success is going to depend on finding that sweet spot, making smart investments, being aware of the social and political context, and, finding creative ways to overcome the obstacles that are bound to pop up.
You got it. And at the end of the day, EIH's success isn't going to be measured just by how much money they make, but by how their work impacts the lives of everyday Ethiopians. If they can effectively use investment to create jobs, boost incomes, and improve living standards, then they'll have really accomplished something.
So it's not just about profits, it's about making a real difference in people's lives.
Exactly. If you zoom out and look at the big picture, EIH could be this incredible catalyst for transforming Ethiopia's economy. Imagine them playing a key role in making agriculture more productive, driving industrial growth, and fostering a thriving tech sector. That would be a game changer.
That's an exciting vision. Ethiopia moving up the value chain, becoming a major player in the region and even globally.
Yeah.
But we've been talking about EIH's impact in a pretty general sense. I'm curious what you think about how their actions might affect specific sectors within Ethiopia. Let's say you're a farmer, a tech entrepreneur, a manufacturer in Ethiopia. How might EIH's decisions directly impact your business?
That's a great question, and it deserves a closer look. Let's dive into those sector-specific implications in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so we've talked about the big picture impact of EIH, but let's get a little more specific. How might their actions actually play out in different sectors of the Ethiopian economy?
All right, well, let's start with agriculture, which is, the backbone of the Ethiopian economy. EIH could invest in modernizing agricultural practices. Things like better irrigation systems, upgrading storage facilities to cut down on those post-harvest losses, maybe even helping to set up more efficient processing plants.
That would be huge for Ethiopian farmers.
Yeah.
A lot of them struggle with, not having access to the latest technology or good infrastructure. If EIH can help them be more productive, connect them to better markets, it could really boost their incomes and improve food security across the country.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just about producing more either. EIH could be really important in helping to develop more value-added agricultural products. So instead of just exporting raw coffee beans, for example, they could support the growth of a real coffee processing industry right there in Ethiopia.
That's interesting. So creating jobs, increasing those export earnings, and, helping Ethiopia capture more of that value chain.
Yeah.
What about manufacturing? How could EIH's involvement shape that sector?
Well, one thing they could do is focus on attracting foreign investment in manufacturing by strategically developing industrial parks and offering incentives to companies to set up shop in Ethiopia.
So they could help create the right conditions for manufacturing to really take off.
Yeah.
But Ethiopia already has some industrial parks. What would make EIH's approach different or more effective?
It's about more than just the physical buildings. EIH could use its resources to make the regulations easier to deal with, make sure there's reliable access to energy and other essential utilities, and even help connect foreign companies with local suppliers. It's about creating a truly competitive environment.
Makes sense. And of course, we can't forget about the tech sector, which has been growing really quickly in Ethiopia lately. What role could EIH play in fostering that growth and building a strong tech ecosystem?
Yeah, there's a lot of potential there. EIH could invest in things like expanding broadband internet access, especially in rural areas. They could also support programs to develop those digital skills and entrepreneurial talent. And imagine if they created venture capital funds or incubators specifically to support Ethiopian tech startups.
Yeah, that would be huge. Who give those young entrepreneurs who have great ideas but maybe not enough resources the support they need to grow their businesses. It sounds like EIH could potentially impact almost every part of the Ethiopian economy.
I think that's right. And their decisions could have really far-reaching consequences, not just for big investors, but for small businesses, entrepreneurs, ordinary people in all sectors of the economy. What EIH does or doesn't do matters.
It's a good reminder that economic policy isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, it's about people's lives.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Given EIH's broad mandate, all the resources they have, and the potential impact on Ethiopia's future, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for them? And maybe even more importantly, what are the potential pitfalls they need to avoid to really make a difference?
That's a great question for our listeners to consider. It's been a fascinating conversation about EIH with you today. Thanks for sharing your insights.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Ethiopian investment holdings. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to the Essential Dialogues podcast. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that matters.